They tried to kill me for money. Not once, not in whispers alone. They planned it with the cold, exact kind of greed that believes a life is a price to be negotiated. My son and my daughter-in-law wanted everything. The house, the papers, the safe deposit box where my name still sat on a certificate of $100 million in family investments. They wanted the ledger of my life erased so they could write their own lines across it. Before I tell you how it unfolded, please. This little channel keeps these voices alive. If this story matters to you even a fraction of how it mattered to me, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It helps truth travel a little farther, and for people like me, that matters. They were careful at first. People who are planning murder don't ransack the house in broad daylight. They puncture trust with tiny, invisible pricks. The late dinners without you, the jokes that feel like knives, the phone calls that end when you enter the room. My son started to look at me in a way I had never seen. Not the man who once called me Ma with warmth, but a ledger that calculated risk and reward. My daughter-in-law, she smiled like a tax form, polite, flat, and finalized. It began with the will. I had been ill a few winters before, and like all sensible people, I had signed papers to place my affairs in order. My lawyer, a careful man, said the documents were clear. My name, the life insurance, the trust. But paper means nothing when someone sets a table of lies and invites the world to dine. They told neighbors I was senile. They said I had dementia, that my memory was failing. They pressed doctors. They flirted with greed, then flirted with cruelty. The neighbors with good intentions nodded and averted their eyes. The world is full of people who will not ask the questions that cost them convenience. The first attempt wasn't theatrical. There was a bad batch of my medication. I woke the morning after a dinner at their home with my head at a heavy stone, my tongue thick as if cotton lived in my mouth. I remember standing at the sink, looking at my hands, and they looked far away, as if someone had replaced me. My son hovered. His face was suddenly thin and blank. "You probably just need rest," he said. His wife poured me water with the gentleness of someone giving poison to a beloved pet. I went to the doctor that afternoon. The nurse's frown was the first honest thing I had seen in weeks. My blood tests were odd. Something was wrong with my liver markers. There were traces unknown to the chart. The doctor raised his eyebrows and ordered further tests. That for a time saved me, because they had expected my slump to be invisible. A slow drifting into the gray. But the medical numbers didn't obey their plan. They were loud and factual and required attention. They tried again, smaller, quieter. A caramel candy with a slip of something bitter slipped into my tea when I didn't look. I caught the edge of it with the back of my hand. It tasted wrong. I spit it out. My daughter-in-law said, "Oh, Mother, you're being childish." And her hand hovered over the sugar bowl, as if to collect what a child leaves behind. I kept my mouth shut then, too. That night I slept with one eye open. My bones remembered that the people who should have loved me were the ones who plotted my absence. The escalation surprised me more with the coldness than with the danger. They staged accidents that would look like misfortune. A candle placed precariously near my reading chair. A tray slipped in the kitchen. Once while gardening, the ladder had been set on a patch of soil that had been dug and refilled carelessly. I climbed and the ladder slipped. I fell hard, but my hip caught a stone and saved me from worse. Each incident read like a rough draft of their script. Clumsy, but insistent. It was the night with the antique car that turned the whole thing into a naked plan. They invited me for dinner to discuss the will. And after my son insisted he drive me home. The street was slick. He offered me a scarf. I refused. The car peeled past the curve too fast. There was a sound like an animal struck. The world rolled. Metal screamed with a sound that felt like it would tear the inside of the world. I thought, in that suspended place between breath and black, that my life had ended. I saw my mother's hands, my father's stoop, moments like thread in a needle's eye. Then something impossible happened. We did not go into the ravine as the trajectory should have promised. The car skidded, then found a small stubborn pocket of earth. A fence post stopped us from tumbling down fully. The seatbelt bit into my ribs. And someone, I don't know how to say this, someone stuck fingers in the window and wrenched the door open. The sky broke and there were shouts. A young man from the corner bakery, the kind who knew every old lady's birthday market order, had seen the skid and was running. He had a flashlight clutched in his fist and a curse in his throat. He dragged me out. If the fence post had not been there, if the wheel had not found that odd patch of grass to grip, I would have been a story pressed into police tape. Instead, I was alive, shaken and angry, but alive. That night the miracle had the face of a stranger. It was small and mundane, and it was everything. They argued loudly in the car afterward, my son and his wife, voices low but frantic. I sat wrapped in a blanket while the ambulance arrived. The young man stood to the side like a lookout, his shoes muddy, his smile a little wild with relief. When the police came, the officers arrested the driver responsible for the crash. Not my son, because he tied his story to the road, but there was enough to make it stick in the paperwork. Defective brakes, a report of a recent trimming near the verge. Officialdom smelled the outline of something and held it under a light. My body was whole enough to tell a story that sounded like the truth. After that, the house felt like a pressure cooker. They were angered that the world had not cooperated with their plan. They had expected that a life could be smoothed away with clever nudges and convenient accidents. They didn't deal with miracles. Miracles are slippery and embarrassing for people who arrange their days by arithmetic. There was a shove for me to move into assisted living after the crash. My son told the home administrators about my fragile health. My daughter-in-law prepared a practical list of things to pack. They wanted me gone in the slow, civil way that keeps signatures clean. But I am not a thing to be packed. I refused. The doctor, who had watched the blood values turn strange months ago, came to the house. He said my recovery was remarkable. He asked me if I felt safe. The question, simple as a door, opened a space in my chest I hadn't known I had reserved for truth. I started to look for proof. I collected notes. I saved pillboxes. I kept receipts in a shoebox under the bed. A ledger of small things. Dates, times, the names of people who had visited at odd hours. I wore an old battered pendant that my mother had given me, and inside its hollow I hid a tiny voice recorder. You laugh. Of course you laugh. But sometimes cunning hides in small manual things. People who think they own you forget that an old woman can outwit a fortune. The police were slow. When I took my little shoebox to the local detective, he blinked at first. He had the comfortable face of someone used to petty disputes over fences and dog bites. But the evidence, the pills found at the pharmacy, a receipt for chemical solvents found in a drawer where there should have been vitamins, sat quiet and undeniable across his desk. He called it in. He wore the expression of a man who had not expected to have to move his hands. He had to learn to be loud enough to pull a net. They were arrested at last, not in a blaze of cinematic justice, but in the slippery, slow legal work of subpoenas and questions. My son's face in court was a study in shock. How dare the world make him account for his calculations? My daughter-in-law's eyes were small points of panic. The neighbors looked on, and some clucked in disapproval. Others softened. Greed has a way of tolerating cruelty until it finds an inconvenient audience, and then it pretends to be bewildered. In the months that followed, the trial dragged like a winter. My hands shook while I sat in the courtroom. Not from fear, but from the years of vibration my flesh had taken from living on the edge of abandonment and violence. Every witness I had gently coaxed out. The bakery boy who had seen the skid, the nurse who noticed the strange drug levels, the driver who had been called about the fencing on the road. Delivered small, basic truths that accumulated into an undeniable structure. The prosecutor built a plain house of fact around them, and slowly the truth became a thing with walls. They said words like attempted fraud, undue influence, criminal conspiracy. They said the kinds of phrases that try to tidy atrocity into legal boxes. And still, for me, the trial was less about the money, although that betrayal was obscene, and more about the idea that a child I raised, who ate at my table and was my name on the tax form, would sit in a room and plan my disappearance with the breezy entitlement of a man checking his accounts. The judge looked at them with a face that had learned to see the difference between words and actions. The sentence was not the last page in the story. The law rarely wraps healing in neat bows. But it was accountability, and accountability is a balm. My son was sentenced to years away, and my daughter-in-law received her own portion of the sentence. They lost their claim to the property when the court found the coercion and the attempts to remove me involuntary and criminal. The papers were changed. The safe deposit box that had been their reason to plan my death remained in my name, then was placed in a trust that outlived their designs. People ask me if I felt revenge. They ask if I felt vindication. I felt relief, yes. I felt the odd, quiet joy of someone who had watched a storm and walked through it without losing her soul. But I will tell you this honestly. What followed was not joy, but the slow, laborious work of rebuilding a life that had been violated by the people who should have loved me most. The miracle I speak about is not a roaring act of God with lightning and trumpets. The miracle was small steps. The bakery boy who kept watch, the doctor who refused to be bought with easy explanations, the detective who treated a little woman's shoebox with seriousness, the truck that clung to a slippery verge and did not let us fall. Miracles are often the faces of ordinary people who are too decent to look away. They are the parts of the world that still work when the edges have been tipped toward ruin. I moved into a smaller house after the trial. I learned to garden again. I found that the dirt beneath my nails felt like a promise. I volunteered with a program that helps elders secure their wills and helps families learn how to respect them. I gave talks, quiet ones, in church basements and community rooms, not to shout but to teach the next person that property is not the only inheritance that matters. I sat with women and men who whispered that their children had become strangers, and I did not pity them. I understood them. I told them that betrayal leaves marks, but so does survival. Now, every time I walk through the grocery store, someone will touch my sleeve and say, "I heard about your case." They look at me with a new kind of kindness, as if their little lights have joined mine in some faint constellation. My bank account sits in a trust that will outlast the hunger of greedy hearts. The 100 million is a line on paper, large and obscene, but it will never be worth my silence again. If there is a final truth to share, it is this. The world will try to tidy cruelty into convenient explanations. It will blame age. It will whisper senility, as if that is a robe that covers wrongdoing. A family that plots against a parent will scramble to make their crime look like common care. But you can fight back. You can collect small truths, receipts, text messages, the names of witnesses. You can make the quiet ledger that turns into loud evidence. And miracles, if you believe in the word, are less about some cosmic buoy and more about the fact that people still choose to help. My miracle was a chorus of ordinary decency. For anyone listening who worries they are being tidied away by their own, listen to your small voice like a flame. Keep records. Ask a neighbor to look in. Hide a small recorder in a pendant if you must. Let the world have to answer if those you love decide your life is a balance sheet. I sit now with my hands placed on this table and the house safe. My hands shake less these days. My voice is older and straighter. My son will not inherit my name. Instead, he inherits a sentence that he must carry for years. The law is not the greatest deliverer, and money is never the measure of life. But the truth, dogged, ordinary truth, saved me. And if you are watching this because someone you love sits at a table and smiles while drawing up papers, take a breath and do not trust the smile. Take the paper, make copies, speak to a lawyer. The world is not as honest as it looks, but there is mercy in witnesses. There is salvation in documents. There is sometimes a miracle in a stranger who refuses to let the car slip into the dark. They failed. Their plan unraveled like cheap thread. And I lived. I live. I tell. I warn. And if you keep listening to voices like mine, maybe the next family will choose differently. Maybe the next child will wake to a different morning.